The fact that somebody in Asia Pacific can reach out to us in their native language
O God, who does wondrous things, blessed be your glorious name forever. Remake us in your image and bring our hearts under your control. Lord, infuse our senators with a love for you that will make their obedience willing, joyful, and consistent. Astound them with your limitless resources and supply all their needs from your bounty. Keep them humble with the conviction that they can't breathe a breath, think a thought, or speak a word without your mercy, grace, and power. And Lord, as the former chaplain of the United States Marine Corps, I thank you for the life and service of Robert S. Muller III. We pray in your great name. Amen.
Will you please join me in the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Morning business is closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will proceed to executive session to consider the following nomination, which the clerk will report.
Nomination, Department of Homeland Security, Mark Wayne Mullen of Oklahoma to be Secretary of Homeland Security.
Mr. President,
Senator from Iowa.
today I will vote for the new Secretary of Homeland Security. The entire Senate will confirm our colleague, the junior senator from Oklahoma, as the Department of Homeland Security Secretary. Senator Mullins is a welcome addition to the cabinet. He is a consensus builder, and most importantly, has Oklahoma dirt under his fingernails. I'm confident that he will use his business experience and, more importantly to this farmer, his rancher experience to get things done in the Department of Homeland Security. I'm confident, as I talk to him today, about the importance of congressional oversight, and I hope he will take congressional oversight very seriously. My advice to him is be transparent and responsive to the American people. Answer our letters. Protect whistleblowers. Hear whistleblowers out. There's no way a secretary can know what's going on in the bowels of the department. And that's why when people come to you saying things aren't right, money's not being spent right, the law's not being followed, listen to them. And as I always say, run the department. Don't let the department run you. I wish Senator Mullen all the best as he takes on this new role. I know he will serve his country with distinction. I urge my colleagues to support his nomination. On another matter, Mr. President, in my years in the United States Senate, I've been a person very interested in the foster care system, serving the young people. So I'd like to recognize a meaningful initiative that the Administration on Children and Families, or ACF, launched called A Home for Every Child. ACF's A Home for Every Child initiative, quote, sets an ambitious goal of achieving a foster home to child ratio greater than 1-to-1 in every state, end of quote. I applaud this very ambitious goal. And I also have been working to beef up foster parent recruitment and retention efforts because kids in foster care deserve qualified, well-trained, and loving parents. My bipartisan Recruiting Families Using Data Act complements ACF's A Home for Every Child initiative by enabling state child welfare agencies to integrate best practices along with quality data. This will help ensure that foster youth and parents are best supported. When referring to raising a child, a common phrase is used, it takes a village. That phrase rings more true when a child experiences foster care. So I want to take this opportunity to thank First Lady Melania Trump for her work to modernize the child welfare system, and it will strengthen partnerships for youth aging out of foster care through the program entitled Fostering the Future for American Children and Family Initiatives. I also want to thank Assistant Secretary Adams for following through on his commitment to tackle foster recruitment and retention challenge that is tainting child welfare agencies nationwide. I look forward to continuing to work with the Senate Committee on Finance to advance recruiting families using Data Act. I yield the floor. Suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Elsa Brooks.
Mr. President.
Senator Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. President, we've been debating the Save America Act for 7 days now. And what's been made clear in this debate is how out of touch Democrats are with most Americans. Polls show that the common sense policies in the Save America Act have support from the American people. But Democrats have repeatedly demonstrated that they don't share the American people's interest in securing our elections. And despite Americans' concerns, Democrats continue to embrace transgender ideology that allows men to compete in women's sports and children to undergo irreversible, life-altering gender transition procedures. Mr. President, at the start of this debate, the Democrat leader had the audacity to say that the Save America Act is a, quote, radical bill. Radical, that's what he said. Well, Mr. President, what's radical, I would say, about ensuring that only American citizens are voting in American elections? What's radical about asking voters for a photo ID? And, Mr. President, I don't know what world Democrats are living in where keeping biological men out of women's sports is a radical proposition. What's radical is men lining up alongside women at the starting line and winning medals and trophies meant for women. What's radical is telling female athletes that they have to share a locker room with a biological male. That's radical, Mr. President. And perhaps what's most radical about Democrats' position is that they seem to have no problem with gender transition procedures for minors. Democrats are more than happy to let transgender ideology reign, even when there's little to no evidence to support gender transition procedures for minors and increasing amounts of scientific evidence about the harms of these procedures for children. But Democrats ignore the science. They ignore the fact that multiple European nations that have looked at the science have reined in gender transition procedures for minors. They ignore the stories of Americans who underwent irreversible procedures as minors and have long lived to regret it. So, Mr. President, the Save America Act is not radical. Radically common sense, maybe. So common sense, in fact, that only congressional Democrats could oppose it. Mr. President, as debate continues on the Save America Act, Republicans are also working to advance two nominees for important posts in the Trump administration. One of those is Colin McDonald, whom President Trump has nominated to lead the new National Fraud Enforcement Division at the Department of Justice. Mr. President, fraud is a serious issue. Last year, it became clear that widespread fraud had taken root in the state of Minnesota. Prosecutors are working through cases and indictments related to at least $9 billion in fraud impacting 14 federally funded programs in that state alone. And Minnesota is just the tip of the iceberg. The Government Accountability Office estimates that as much as $500 billion in federal funds is lost each year to fraud. Now, needless to say, Mr. McDonald has his work cut out for him, and he's well suited to the challenge. Colin McDonald is a career federal prosecutor, which means for his entire career, he has had only one client, and that's the American people. Until coming to Washington to work at the Department of Justice last year, Mr. McDonald spent 10 years as an assistant U.S. attorney in the Southern District of California. In that position, he spent a considerable amount of time trying cases in federal court, including cases dealing with fraud, money laundering, and public corruption. And his work has received notable praise. During one case in the 9th District, the judge actually interrupted proceedings to praise Mr. McDonald. None other than Judge Harry Pregerson, a notably progressive judge, said of Mr. McDonald, and I quote, "I want to commend you on your candor, your openness, and your honesty with the court," end quote. Mr. President, Colin McDonald is well suited to provide justice for American taxpayers in this role, and I look forward to confirming him swiftly so he can get to work. Mr. President, the other nominee that we'll be confirming this week is somebody we all know well, our colleague, Mark Wayne Mullen. President Trump has nominated Mark Wayne to be the Secretary of Homeland Security. It's a tough assignment, made all the more challenging right now by Democrats having shut down DHS for 5 weeks. But we all know that Mark Wayne isn't afraid of a challenge. Far from it. As a young man, Mark Wayne left college to take over his family plumbing business. He grew that small enterprise into a large and successful business in the state of Oklahoma. Just a few weeks after being elected to the House, when the Oklahoma delegation was touring storm damage, Mark Wayne cut away from the other congressmen and climbed through debris to try to shut off water shooting through the wreckage. See a problem? Take action to solve it. That's Mark Wayne. It's a big part of what drew him to public service. Mr. President, I think all of us are familiar with Mark Wayne Mullen's seemingly unlimited supply of energy. His workout class in the House gym is the stuff of legend. In the halls, you can find him bouncing a little pink ball to get out some of his energy. And that energy doesn't come from coffee. Mark Wayne does it all on decaf. No, Mr. President, Mark Wayne's energy is all him. But his strength, he'll tell you, isn't his own. Mark Wayne's strength comes from his wife and childhood sweetheart, Christy, and his rock-solid faith in God, both of which have made him an outstanding public servant, and most importantly, a loving father to their 6 children. Mr. President, heading up the Department of Homeland Security is a serious job. And I'm proud to cast a vote for Mark Wayne Mullen, knowing with confidence that he is up to the work and to the task. I know how much I've depended on Mark Wayne as a colleague and friend during his 3 years here in the United States Senate. And I'm profoundly sorry to lose him. But the Senate's loss is the Department of Homeland Security's gain. I want to thank Mark Wayne for his service here in the Senate and wish him the very best as he continues to serve our country at DHS. And I hope whoever gets assigned to his security detail is ready to keep up. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Elsa Brooks.
Mr. President.
Majority Whip.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, the Senate will soon confirm Senator Mark Wayne Mullen of Oklahoma to be our Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. The sooner he's on the job, the safer, the stronger, and the more secure America will be. Mark Wayne is a servant leader in the truest sense. His hometown is Westville, Oklahoma, population of only 1,300 people. He's the youngest of 7 children. When he was 20 years old, he stepped up to save his dad's plumbing company. He turned it into one of the largest in the state of Oklahoma. Mark Wayne is a father, a fighter, a Christian, and someone that others have known they can count on. He has served in both the House and the Senate of the United States. I'm fortunate to have worked closely with Mark Wayne on a day-to-day basis because he is a trusted member of our whip team. Mark Wayne is tough. He's hardworking. He works with others to solve problems. You always know where he stands. That's the way Mark Wayne Mullen is. On the whip team, he's played a critical role in passing the largest investment in American security in 40 years. He has been consistent in his commitment to enforce our law and to strengthen our border. Once confirmed, he's going to bring the same focus and urgency and consistency to lead that Department of Homeland Security. At his confirmation hearing, Mark Wayne laid out a clear vision. He said, "My goal is for people to understand we're out there, we're protecting them, and we're working for them." That's exactly what he should do, and it's what he will do. The Department of Homeland Security exists to protect the American people from danger. From counterterrorism to disaster relief to border security, that department protects our communities from terrorists, from illegal drugs, and from cyber attacks. Mark Wayne understands fully the full weight of that critical mission. Mark Wayne also understands the importance of trust. He has made it clear that he will be open, communicative, cooperative, and committed to working with others to get the job done. Even Senate Democrats have said they like Mark Wayne. They may have disagreed with him politically, but they acknowledge his stellar character. Senator Brian Schatz of Hawaii said this month, "I like him personally." Senator Chris Coons of Delaware says Mark Wayne is well liked. Senator Peter Welch of Vermont served with Senator Mullen here in the Senate as well as in the House, and he said of Mark Wayne, he's respected, he's honest, and he's competent. At the confirmation hearing, Senator Ruben Gallego of Arizona said Mark Wayne is upstanding and qualified. That kind of respect speaks to Mark Wayne's character. As the Senate considers Mark Wayne's nomination, we cannot ignore the situation facing the Department of Homeland Security today, right now, this very moment. Because right now, the Department of Homeland Security is shut down. Senate Democrats shut it down by withholding its funding. That is the cruel fact. It is the undeniable fact. The fact is, Senate Democrats have voted 5 times to block full funding for the Department of Homeland Security. Many employees are working without pay. Others have been furloughed. Families are struggling to meet basic needs. TSA agents are quitting or calling in sick in rising numbers. And as a result, wait times at major airports are rising as well. We've seen terrorist attacks in New York, Virginia, Michigan, and Texas. Pro-Iran cyber hackers successfully attacked a major medical company in Michigan. The situation remains dangerous today. The warning lights are flashing red. And Democrats would rather pander to protect illegal immigrant criminals than pay to protect American people. Mark Wayne Mullen is ready to lead. He is ready to serve with seriousness and character, and he's going to be a leader who makes our country safer, stronger, and more secure. He will secure our borders. He will fight terrorism. He will protect our cyberspace. He will safeguard our communities, and he will support the individuals who keep our country safe. Today, this Senate will confirm Mark Wayne Mullen. Then the Senate must fully fund the Department of Homeland Security because the safety and security of the American people depend upon it. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor. the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Elsa Brooks.
President,
Democrat leader.
I ask unanimous consent the quorum call be dismissed.
Without objection.
Okay. First, Mr. President, let me begin today by saying that my deepest prayers are with the families of the two pilots who were killed in terrible collision at LaGuardia Airport this morning. The video and audio of the collision were heart-wrenching. It's like a punch to the stomach when you listen to it. It leaves you gasping for air. I spoke with Chairwoman Hamidi of the National Transportation Safety Board, which has always done an outstanding job, impartial, in investigating these tragedies. And I spoke to her. I spoke to Chair Hamidi earlier today, and she told me the situation is under investigation. She told me that over 25 investigators are on their way to LaGuardia right now to get to the bottom of what happened. We owe it to those pilots and their families to find out exactly how this accident was permitted to happen. And I will remain in constant communication with Chair Homendy and the NTSB, as well as local authorities as the investigation unfolds. My heart goes out to all of those affected by this tragedy. My heart goes out to the 2 pilots who were killed, and to all the passengers who were injured at LaGuardia. Okay, on Homeland Security talks. Over the weekend, and for weeks now, Democrats have engaged Republicans in good faith to pay our TSA workers, to fund DHS, while also enacting common-sense safeguards to rein in ICE. Both sides talked all weekend long. We had some constructive conversations, but there's considerably more work to be done, and Democrats are ready to keep negotiating. Democrats believe TSA staff should be paid now. We tried to move forward this weekend to pay these workers, but Republicans have blocked pay for TSA workers in a roll call vote where they all voted no on Saturday, and additionally they have blocked pay for TSA workers 7 times when Democrats tried to bring it up. It's preposterous because the chaos at our airports is simply unacceptable. Still, Democrats are going to keep working in good faith. Donald Trump, meanwhile, is trying to sabotage negotiations, demanding that talks stop entirely until Congress passes the SAVE Act, a bill that has nothing to do with paying TSA workers and nothing to do with ending the shutdown. That's right. Donald Trump is now saying we'll pay TSA only after Congress passes voter suppression. What a ridiculous thing to do. What a callous thing to do. He doesn't give a damn about the American people. He cares about his own election. He thinks this SAVE Act, which isn't going to pass, will change how the election comes out, and he uses millions and millions of Americans as hostages. How can our Republican friends on the other side of the aisle go along with this? It stinks on its face. You don't need any deeper explanation. This morning, unfortunately, Trump doubled down in Memphis, saying explicitly as possible he won't pay TSA workers and he won't end this shutdown until the SAVE Act is passed. Let's make it very clear. Donald Trump is the one standing in the way of paychecks for TSA workers with the ridiculous attempt to pass the SAVE Act. The SAVE Act, which would destroy a lot of what we know about democracy. The SAVE Act, which would disenfranchise 20 million American citizens, in all likelihood, from voting in the next election. The SAVE Act, which is designed to do, as Kirsty Noem said, to allow people to vote who we like how they vote, as opposed to others. Well, Donald Trump, your latest temper tantrum is not going to work. The SAVE Act does not have the votes to pass this chamber, and Democrats will fight it every step of the way. The SAVE Act has nothing to do with DHS, Homeland Security. It has nothing to do with TSA workers or making sure ICE follows the same rules as every other federal law enforcement agency in the country. Every other law enforcement agency uses warrants when they bust into, needs a warrant when they bust into your home. Every other law enforcement agency doesn't wear masks. Trump and the Republicans are insisting that continue. And they're saying we're holding TSA workers and millions and millions of passengers hostage. And now all of a sudden, in addition to that, Trump says, I won't move forward unless we pass the SAVE Act, which isn't going to happen, Mr. Trump. It is not going to happen. Democrats' position has not changed. We want to pay TSA workers today. We're ready to meet with the White House today to keep talking. In fact, we were going to meet this morning with Tom Homan, but apparently the White House pulled that meeting because of Donald Trump's temper tantrum. They're all scrambling around there in the White House. They don't know what to do. Their boss, the president, comes out with these idiotic statements every day, whether it's related to the war in Iran, where he contradicts himself, whether it's related to the SAVE Act, where he doesn't even know what it does. or related to what's happening in Homeland Security. We hope that Donald Trump will stop derailing these talks and let negotiations continue. Democrats want to be reasonable, and we're going to keep working in good faith to reach a solution. We need to pay TSA workers ASAP. The American people want ICE to change its violent ways. They do not want a repeat kind of violence we saw earlier this year in Minnesota. They certainly do not want to see ICE detaining passengers at airports and making things work. Donald Trump is tying himself in a triple knot on the Iran war, on the SAVE Act, and on TSA workers. And he tightens that knot around his waist last night by saying ICE should go to the airports, and then by saying that he would not go forward unless SAVE Act passed. He's making it harder and harder for himself. He's making himself less and less popular with the American people, and he's causing tens of millions to wonder what is going on in that man's head. So, that's the dilemma we all face, and it's the American people who suffer. They suffer at the airports. They suffer as gas prices go up because of the Iran war. They suffer because he's threatening their democracy. Now let me talk about ICE at the airports. This morning, Tom Homan from the Department of Homeland Security said ICE agents have arrived at 14 airports, New York, Chicago, Atlanta, Pittsburgh, elsewhere. Everywhere ICE goes, trouble follows. We've seen that. And it is highly likely the airports will be no exception. No one trusts that ICE is going to make things better. Patrolling airports is not in ICE's job description. It's certainly not what they're trained to do. And let's be clear, ICE agents performing the work of TSA officers are not going to make our airports any safer. It's going to make them less safe because ICE agents aren't trained in airport security. These agents aren't familiar with the layout of the airports they're walking into. They don't know the protocols or procedures in the same way TSA workers do. It's a simple solution, Donald Trump. Pay the TSA workers so you don't have to bring ICE agents in there. ICE agents are going to miss things, and that's assuming they focus on security. What if they do what they've done in other cities and start harassing travelers, asking to check papers, check their citizenship, detain them without due process, even if they are American citizens, just as we've seen them do for months now? And I wouldn't be surprised if Donald Trump and Stephen Miller would encourage them to do just that at the airport. In any case, ICE's mere presence is going to inflame the situation at these airports where tensions are already high. Every time a traveler walks to their gate or stands in line at security and sees an ICE agent lurking about, they're going to be reminded of Donald Trump's chaos. They're going to be reminded of Minneapolis. And they're going to think the chaos is now coming to my city too. So Donald Trump, the more you keep ICE agents at our airports, the more you will be reminding people of how much chaos and fear ICE has already caused. It's a terrible idea that could backfire on the country and on Donald Trump. Instead of trying to replace TSA workers with ICE agents, Trump should pay TSA workers right away, get Republicans to come to a deal before the chaos gets worse. Let me repeat that because it's so simple. Instead of trying to replace TSA workers with ICE agents, Donald Trump should simply pay TSA workers and get Republicans to come to a deal before the chaos gets even worse. On Iran, Donald Trump's war with Iran now enters its fourth week. There's no end in sight. Instead of giving the American people a clear plan for how to move forward, the President of the United States, the Commander-in-Chief, continues, unfortunately, to flail. Over the weekend, Trump threatened to destroy Iran's major power infrastructure if Iran did not come to the table. Then this morning, after all the bluster and all the threats, Trump appeared to retreat, suddenly claiming there are major points of agreement with the regime, even as Iran flatly denies it. and there are no diplomatic talks. What is going on here? This is not leadership from the commander-in-chief. He's either confused, lying, or both, and that's what always happens. Whatever pops into his head at the moment, he speaks. And 2 hours or 2 days later, if he has a totally contradictory thought, he says that one. That's not the way to solve our problems. That's not the way to get Iran to do what we want them to do. He must look like a flailing fool to many of them. A month ago, the national price of gasoline was $2.93 a gallon. Today it's $3.94, up roughly $1 in a month. Who is to blame? One man, Donald Trump. And this increase in gasoline is one of the sharpest monthly spikes Americans have seen since Putin's invasion of Ukraine. Prices had been coming down. Then Trump started a war that most of the American people did not want, and he sent prices shooting back up. Enough is enough. Senate Republicans need to hold hearings and bring members of the cabinet under oath to explain exactly what's happening in Iran. We need accountability, we need transparency, but most of all, we need a strategy and an endgame, something Donald Trump's war with Iran is dangerously lacking. Yield the floor.
Mr. President,
Democratic Whip.
Mr. President, we in a quorum call?
We're not.
Thank you. Mr. President, today is the 16th anniversary of an amazing event in the history of the United States. Millions of Americans can remember a time when access to affordable health care was just not a reality in America. It was a time when you had a pre-existing condition, you or your family, you could be disqualified from any health insurance coverage because of it. And being uninsured was a reality for those who just weren't healthy and wealthy enough to afford it. 16 years ago today, it all changed when President Obama signed the Affordable Care Act into law, opening the door to quality, affordable health coverage for more than 30 million Americans. This transformed our health care system. Suddenly, no one could be denied insurance coverage because of a pre-existing condition. Addiction and mental health coverage were no longer optional, they were required in health insurance plans. And young adults could remain on their parents' plans until they reached the age of 26. Casting my vote for the Affordable Care Act is something I'm proud of and will never forget. But now, that law is under attack. Donald Trump and some Republicans in Congress have tried relentlessly to repeal the Affordable Care Act. They called it Obamacare, mocking it. And while they haven't succeeded outright, they've jeopardized its benefits for millions of Americans. Last summer, Republicans in the majority in Congress passed their so-called One Big Beautiful Bill, the Trump budget, which cut Medicaid by $1 trillion and slashed the Affordable Care Act by $300 billion, which will result in more than 10 million people in America losing their health insurance. Have you ever lived without health insurance with a family? Have you ever had a child who was sick and you had no health insurance? You'll never forget as long as you live. I've been there. To make matters worse, Republicans in Congress also refused to extend the ACA's enhanced premium tax credit last year. The fallout of that Republican decision has been devastating to millions of American families. They've contacted my office and the office of every one of us, both parties, and explained to people what happened to their health insurance premiums because of that decision in the Trump Big Beautiful Budget Bill. Millions of Americans have had to forego insurance or watch their premiums double or triple. The peace of mind that the Affordable Care Act brought to millions of Americans is fading away, and we must build the momentum to reverse these cuts and address the shortcomings of our health care system. I want to work with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to improve health care for everyone, but we need buy-in from our Republican colleagues to move forward, something they have refused to do to this point. Mr. President, on a separate subject, today the Senate will vote on the nomination of our colleague from Oklahoma, Senator Mark Wayne Mullen. If confirmed, he will serve as the next Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. His predecessor, Secretary Kristi Noem, presided over a department that steamrolled civil rights and violated court orders to carry out Stephen Miller and the President's mass deportation campaign. In pursuit of that campaign, communities, including my city of Chicago, were terrorized by masked, militarized agents whose presence did not establish law and order that the President promised. Instead, indiscriminate violent roundups swept up citizens, legal residents, American citizens, people with no serious criminal record, not just the, quote, worst of the worst, which the President had promised. In the state of Minnesota, 2 American citizens were killed by these occupying paramilitary forces, the so-called ICE agents, simply for exercising their constitutional rights. Failure will be the defining feature of Secretary Noem's legacy at the Department of Homeland Security, but so too will be the lasting pain she inflicted across the country, which still bears the scars left by rogue federal immigration agents under her watch. While Secretary Noem may be gone, she ought not escape accountability for her actions. I have little hope that Attorney General Pam Bondi, weaponized Department of Justice, will pursue that accountability. But the statute of limitations for many of these crimes, including any deceptions before the Senate Judiciary Committee under oath earlier this month will exceed this president's last day in office. Senate Democrats have sought to rein in the lawlessness at DHS by recommending common sense measures that are broadly supported by the American people. Did you hear the White House announcement that they're going to take the ICE agents and send them to the airports to supplement the TSA? Well, the people with the TSA have said they're not trained to do our job. They can't read the X-ray machines. They're simply law enforcement agents of their own stripe. Interesting enough, too, they have announced that they will not be wearing masks in the airports of America. Thank goodness. So that traveling Americans and visitors to this country will not believe that this kind of justice really represents our country. We've tried to rein in the lawlessness of DHS by recommending common sense measures to change it. But unfortunately, the White House and some of my Republican colleagues have allowed TSA agents and the Coast Guard to go without pay. On 9 or 10 separate occasions in the last several weeks, we've come to the floor of the United States Senate, the Democrats, offering to fund the entire Department of Homeland Security, but for those 2 sections for ICE as well as CBP. We're going to fund the others, which would include TSA agents who've missed a paycheck. And each time, a Republican senator has stood up and objected. If they would not object, the payment would be made. We'd catch up with the payroll of these people who are performing these valuable law enforcement functions. Same thing holds true for Coast Guard and FEMA and CISA. We're not asking for much. Democrats have said repeatedly that in the meantime, we'll work with the administration for new standards for ICE that are consistent with law enforcement across the United States. How many state troopers in your state wear masks when they stop people on the highway? None of them. So the demands that this ICE agencies should be treated differently than professional police forces across America just doesn't make sense. And we've said that while negotiations continue, we'll be prepared to fund the rest of DHS. Senate Republicans have blocked us in that effort 10 times, all while our chaos at our airports grow. Yesterday, the president reportedly rejected a bipartisan offer brought to him by the majority leader, the Republican leader of the Senate, which would fund all of the Department of Homeland Security except for ICE. President Trump wants Senate Republicans to hold DHS funding hostage until the Senate passes his Save America Act. I'll save my speech on that terrible bill for another day. Instead of taking the deal, the president announced via social media that he would deploy ICE agents to airports, as I mentioned earlier. That directive caught officials at ICE off guard, and they were forced to scramble to piece together some plan. This was just amusing of the president. He announced it, and now they have to try to make it work. In response, the Flight Attendants Union said, the introduction of ICE agents into airports creates contradictory missions, as attempts to question passengers about immigration status may distract them from ensuring airport security. They continue, there's one solution that immediately solves the problem at our airports. Pay the people who are already trained to protect us today. I support that completely. We've tried 10 times on the floor of the Senate. I hope this week we'll try again. The people who are working at TSA deserve it. I agree. The people do not need more untrained ICE agents at this point. They need a paycheck to do their job. Against this background, Senate is considering whether Senator Mullen should assume his new role as DHS Secretary. The problems at DHS are larger than any one person, and I remain concerned my colleagues will not rein in their abuses. Senator Mullen has not criticized the department's past violence or tactics in the president's mass deportation campaign. He has issues with managing his temper, we've seen that, and he has virtually no experience with DHS, a sprawling agency that employs hundreds of thousands of people. I cannot look in the eyes of my constituent, Miramar Martinez, an American citizen who was labeled a domestic terrorist after being brutally shot 5 times on Kedzie Avenue in Chicago, Illinois, by a masked Border Patrol agent. It was an outrage. It is a miracle that she survived. Or Leah, the high school student from the North Lawndale High School, who has spoken out against immigration raids after her community was tear gassed and her friends and neighbors arrested by a masked ICE and Border Patrol agent. Leah is an American citizen. I cannot turn to them and promise to hold this administration to account on voting to install someone who might be another yes man who only enable this president to continue. For these reasons, I will not support Senator Mullen's confirmation to lead the Department of Homeland Security, and I yield the floor. Mr. President, I note the absence of the floor.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alston-Brooks.
Senator from Texas.
President, are we in a quorum call?
Yes,
I'd ask consent that the quorum call be dispensed with.
without objection.
Mr. President, this week we kick off the 2026 Major League Baseball season. While fans across the country will once again enjoy cheering on the Texas Rangers and the Houston Astros, I'm reminded of the wise words of one of the great legends of America's pastime. Baseball Hall of Fame legend Babe Ruth once said, "It's hard to beat a person who never gives up." For several days now, the Senate's been debating and considering the Save America Act. This bill would simply require individuals to present proof of U.S. citizenship when registering to vote, as well as photo identification before voting in a federal election. To show how far the Democrats have gone in opposing common sense measures, one of the amendments to this bill was one that would counter Democrats' dangerous and radical gender ideology by prohibiting men from competing in women's sports. Our Democratic colleagues should be embarrassed by their opposition, but of course they're not. And they did not agree. Poll after poll shows that Americans are strongly opposed to men competing in women's sports. And Republicans will not give up on this issue. And the American people are with us. And we also will not waver on our support for the Save America Act because it will secure the nation's elections. Voter ID is just common sense. We all know that. In this country, you need an ID for almost everything you do, from boarding a plane to entering a federal building to buying a beer, renting a car, opening a bank account, renting a hotel room. Presenting an ID is a facet of almost every aspect of our daily lives. So why should it be prohibited in terms of exercising one of the most important prerogatives that American citizens can perform, which is casting their ballot? There's simply no rational explanation for why Democrats are against this. Of course, trying to think, what possible reason could they have? One is, of course, the most obvious, which is Trump derangement syndrome. Democrats have made it their mission to deny, refute, and obstruct every single policy put forward by President Trump, simply because he supports it. If President Trump supports it, they oppose it. Of course, they won't put it in those terms. Instead, they falsely claim that the Save America Act will disenfranchise voters. Well, it's a fascinating thing to me that we're anywhere from 70 to 80% of people who are polled say they support the requirement for a photo ID. So I suppose by logic, based on the Democratic position, is that 70 to 80% of the people polled are for disenfranchising themselves. Well, obviously that makes no sense whatsoever. Earlier this week, Minority Leader Senator Schumer said the SAVE Act is not about election integrity, it is voter suppression. Plain and simple. Well, it's really interesting. You know, we have videos of then Representative Schumer, who said 30 years ago, he said, one way to prove you're a bona fide person who can have a job is to ask for a driver's license and a Social Security card. So my question to Senator Schumer is this: which is true and which is false? Both statements cannot be true. It seems that Senator Schumer is of two minds on this topic, depending on his political expediency. But we all know what's going on. We all know what's going on. The fact is, Democrats are masquerading their opposition to President Trump as voter suppression. But we all know that's not true. The only votes that will be suppressed as a result of the passage of this bill will be that of non-citizens who cannot legally vote in the first place. Now, our Democratic colleagues may say, well, it's already illegal. Well, there's a lot of things that are illegal that aren't, if they're not enforced, then that deterrence will not occur. That accountability will not occur. So let me set the record straight. The only votes that will be suppressed by the Save America Act are those of non-citizens or illegal aliens. So one other theory I've heard suggested is 4 years President Biden had open border policies, letting literally millions of people into the country, many of whom we don't know where they are or what they are doing. Occasionally we find out when they commit criminal acts against innocent American citizens. But now that President Biden has opened the borders, and what we are attempting to do is make sure that only American citizens get to vote, Democrats are opposed. The only reason why Democrats, beyond Trump derangement syndrome, would oppose this is because they want the people who came in during the 4 years of the Biden's open border policies to be able to cast a ballot. If anything, voter ID empowers Americans to vote and protects the integrity of the voting process, because every illegitimate vote that's cast undermines and dilutes legitimate voters' ballot. And by requiring voter ID, it will give people greater trust in our elections and faith in the outcomes. We need to restore the public trust in our institutions, including elections. And the more people believe that our elections are free and fair, the more they will participate in those elections, something we should all want. President Abraham Lincoln famously laid out his vision for our nation in the Gettysburg Address when he talked about a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Well, what he was talking about was government by American citizens, people who are legitimately casting their ballot, and no one else. And nowhere do these words read truer than at the ballot box, where the American people cast their vote and make their voice heard. This, of course, is how our democracy works, and it hinges on the belief that elections are free and fair and secure and ensure a peaceful transition of power. Requiring a proof of citizenship is the surest and safest way we can help build trust and confidence with the American people and instill confidence in our elections. Self-government itself means nothing without free and fair elections. And as I've said multiple times this last week, this is an 80-20 issue. But of course, our Democratic colleagues believe that 80% who support these common sense measures literally want to disenfranchise themselves, which is ridiculous. Public opinion is clear. The American people overwhelmingly support voter ID and proof of citizenship for voting. In 2025, the Pew Research Center showed 83% of voters, including 71% of Democrats, supported requiring photo ID at the voting booth. So the facts speak for themselves. Americans want and deserve photo ID. We'll continue to fight to pass the Save America Act and deliver on the mandate given to us by the American people. Mr. President, on another matter later today, we'll be voting on the confirmation of Senator Mullen as Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. In the Senate, Mark Wayne has been a conservative warrior with a proven track record of supporting the American First agenda and President Trump. He's been dogged in advocating for the good of his home state of Oklahoma, and I have every confidence he will carry out the same spirit of zeal and unwavering determination in his new role overseeing the Department of Homeland Security. As Democrats continue to hold funding for this agency hostage, we need a strong hand at the helm more than ever. We know that what the Democrats are doing in blocking the payment of appropriations for the Department of Homeland Security is endangering public safety in a number of ways. First, at the airports, where our TSA agents are overwhelmed and are not being paid. They've now missed 2 paychecks. This is a basic security measure put in place after 9/11, after the terrorist attacks of 9/11. And we know one component of ICE is the Homeland Security Investigations, which works hand in hand with the FBI to investigate domestic terrorism attacks. And so literally, by not funding Homeland Security investigations, Democrats are making it more likely, not less likely, that we'll have a successful terrorist attack on our home soil. We also know that the TSA agents had nothing to do with the differences that separate Democrats and Republicans here. In fact, their complaint is with ICE because, again, they're the open borders policy. They don't want immigration laws enforced, and so they're going to do everything they can to block funding for immigration and customs enforcement, but that also includes Homeland Security investigations. And they come out here and they offer unanimous consent requests saying, oh, we'll pay for the salaries of the Transportation Security Agency, but we won't pay to support the rest of the functions of the Department of Homeland Security, including support for FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, for the Coast Guard, and for ICE. The irony is we already passed funding for ICE in the One Big Beautiful Bill, so their blockade of the funding for the Department of Homeland Security is not going to have an immediate impact on ICE. But it does demonstrate how out of touch and how extreme the Democrats have become in their opposition to common sense measures that protect public safety. It's inexcusable to have the Department of Homeland Security, the very agency whose duty it is to protect and defend the homeland, shut down amidst all this chaos. At a time when global tensions are rising and the threat landscape is even more perilous, we can't afford to play politics with the safety and security of the American people. It's time for this to end. It's past time for this to end. This is not how the Senate is supposed to work. And this certainly isn't what my constituents in Texas nor any American deserves. So my hope is that the negotiations that are ongoing right now will be fruitful immediately, and that we will reopen the Department of Homeland Security, not for the good of any political party, but for the good of the American people. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
President, Senator from New Jersey.
I noticed the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alston-Brooks.
Senator from Michigan.
President, I move that the quorum call be initiated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, in just a little over a year since taking office, the Trump administration and the Department of Homeland Security have completely broken trust with the American people. In the last year, President Trump has made sweeping cuts to programs and personnel at the department, undermining key missions from counterterrorism and cybersecurity protections to assistance following national disasters. These actions are putting the safety and the security of Americans at risk at a time when many of the threats the department was created to address, like terrorism and cyber attacks, are on the rise because of the president's war in Iran. These cuts to critical national security missions have all been at the expense of the Trump administration's singular focus on indiscriminate immigration enforcement that has led to serious disruptions in communities all across our country. It was only 2 months ago when the country watched in horror as 2 U.S. citizens, Alex Preddy and Renee Good, were killed by Homeland Security law enforcement officers. We saw with our own eyes how officers have routinely deployed tear gas and pepper spray against Americans who were simply exercising their First Amendment rights. Secretary Noem's leadership at the department has been a disaster, and Americans want to see a course correction. But I'm not convinced that one change in leadership is enough to right the ship. President Trump and advisors like Stephen Miller are continuing to drive so much of the chaos at the Department of Homeland Security. When the president nominated Senator Mullen to lead the department, I came into the process with an open mind. However, I do not believe that he is the right person for the job. We need a secretary who has a clear understanding of the department's many different missions and a keen awareness of the challenges that the department faces. We need a secretary who's a steady leader, who won't rush to judgment without having all the facts, and who won't add fuel to the fire when there is a crisis. At a time when political violence is rising, we need a secretary who will condemn violence, not encourage it. And we need a secretary who can be trusted to be transparent and open with information to both Congress and the American people, especially when an emergency strikes. Unfortunately, I have not seen the nominee exhibit these desperately needed characteristics in his confirmation process. And I urge President Trump to reassess his administration's prior record, nominate someone who will help return the department's focus to all of its critical national security missions. We need someone who will be more than just another rubber stamp. We need someone who will be thoughtful, deliberate, and work to restore the trust of the department. Therefore, I will be voting no, and I urge all of my colleagues to do the same. Mr. President, notice the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks.
Chair recognizes the senator from Nevada.
Mr. President, I ask that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. President, as we enter spring and schools across the nation approach their spring breaks, millions of families will soon be traveling. They'll be relying on our airports to travel, to visit family, to go on vacation. But unfortunately, they'll be met with longer lines because Washington Republicans refuse to pay our TSA agents. That's right. The Department of Homeland Security is currently without funding because Washington Republicans would rather see it shut down than pass common sense, just common sense guardrails on ICE. In fact, every Senate Republican present voted just this past weekend against paying our TSA agents. As a result, the American people are paying the price. And when TSA staffing levels drop because officers aren't getting paid, wait times at airport security checkpoints, well, they stretch longer and longer. This doesn't just inconvenience travelers. It undermines security and directly threatens jobs and businesses and livelihoods. And the situation is so dire at our airports that the Trump administration is going to send untrained ICE agents to our airports, untrained ICE agents, to try to do the job of our highly trained TSA agents. That's why I rise yet again with a simple, practical proposal to pay hard-working TSA agents, pay them right now. They deserve it. If we cannot move forward with funding for the entire Department of Homeland Security, we should at least be able to come together on this. The Trump administration and Senate leadership are having ongoing negotiations on the guardrails on ICE, and TSA officers should not be caught in the middle of that fight. So today I'm asking my colleagues to take just a simple step, pass my legislation right now to pay TSA workers so that commercial air travel remains safe and functional. And let me say this, claiming that you will not agree to pay TSA agents because this bill doesn't fund the entire department, well, it's frankly just an excuse. Because if Washington Republicans truly believe that, then why did they agree to literally fund everything else in our government except for DHS? If it has to be all or nothing, like they're now claiming, then why agree to fund parts of our government where we have an agreement and leave DHS unfunded? I can tell you why, because they know it's the right thing to do. They know that other government employees should not be penalized for the president's mass deportation agenda. And that's exactly why we're asking for this today. Don't penalize TSA and the traveling public for the fact that you refuse to rein on ICE and have them be held accountable, have them be trained, transparent, and accountable like every other law enforcement agent in this country. And so, as if in legislative session, and notwithstanding Rule 22, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 362 S4127, that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there an objection?
Mr. President,
Chair recognizes the senator from Kansas.
reserving the right to reject. Mr. President, my colleague from Nevada asked this floor to fund TSA. She and her colleagues have voted against TSA funding at least 5, if not 6 times over the past several weeks. Republicans have voted to fund TSA, to fund all of DHS. So this just seems a bit hypocritical, I guess. As I think about the situation here, I would ask my colleague, why did it take Democrats 30 days to come to the table and discuss this issue with Republicans? 30 days. And then we started negotiations. There were some talks on Thursday and Friday between leaders of both parties. And then over the weekend, the Democrats refused to continue those discussions. Why? Was it because they wanted to go home? Well, look, we all wanted to go home. TSA officers would like to have a paycheck as well.
So it's just lost. It's not lost on me. How in the world can we sit here and try to ask us to fund TSA when Republicans have consistently voted to fund DHS? This is now the 37th day of the shutdown. Remember, DHS was formed out of the ashes of September the 11th, when we took 22 agencies and brought them together. That there was maybe some information missed that wasn't shared in September 11th, maybe that day never happens. So why would we start breaking up these agencies now and break up their funding? That we're a more secure country when we fund all of DHS, not just a part of it. So again, Republicans have voted to fund TSA at least 6 times in the past 2 weeks, and Democrats have voted at least 6 times to not fund TSA. Mr. President, therefore, I ask that the Senator modify their request so that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 156, H.R. 4553. I further ask that the substitute amendment at the desk be considered and agreed to. The bill as amended be considered, read a 3rd time and passed, and that the motions to reconsider be considered, made, and laid upon the table.
Mr. President,
Does the senator so modify their request?
I reserve the right to object.
Senator from Nevada.
Thank you. I think we can all agree that it would be better to fund DHS as a whole instead of piecemeal, but you won't agree to common sense reforms. In fact, the President himself has said this weekend that he will not agree to any reform or funding DHS. He's holding other bills hostage. So it is on the President's desk. The President is clearly interjected himself in this by putting ICE in our airports where we can fund the entire Department of Homeland Security, continue the discussions on ICE that are going back and forth with the President and his team and leadership, and be done with it. And in the meantime, if we pass my piece for right now, we can at least pass TSA. But the President has interjected himself again. He doesn't want guardrails, and so I want to just at least prevent those TSA agents from missing another paycheck in the meantime, get ICE out of our airports, and therefore I object.
Objection is heard. Is there an objection to the original?
I'm done. I object. One more time.
Objection is heard. I recognize the senator from Nevada.
You know, I find this really disappointing. Paying our hardworking TSA officers shouldn't be controversial. It's not partisan. The funding isn't controversial. People in my state and every state waiting 3 hours, maybe more than that. They're missing their flights. And everyone here has the power to do something about it. My Republican colleagues have the power to do something about it. They don't have to wait for the President. So if Washington Republicans, my Senate colleagues, really want to do what's right by their constituents, by the TSA workers, you would have passed my bill to pay TSA officers instead of punishing them and the American people because of your inaction. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
To recognize the senator from Oklahoma.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to waive the mandatory quorum call with respect to the McDonald nomination.
Without objection.
Mr. President, we're talking again about the SAVE Act. This simple piece of legislation focuses on 2 key ideas. That if you're an American citizen, which is required by law, you just show it. I call that the trust and verify portion of the bill. The 1965 Voting Rights Act begins with the statement, all citizens. It is already required under federal law that you have to be a citizen of the United States to vote. We've all agreed on that. There's no one disputing that. Republican, Democrat, Independent, we all agree American citizens are the ones that should decide the future of America. What we disagree on is, should we check? Or should we just trust that it actually is true? I've shared in this body before that in Oklahoma we passed a statute several years ago saying that if you go to jury duty and you tell a judge, I'm not eligible to be able to serve on a jury because I'm not a citizen in the United States, in Oklahoma, we then check to see if you're registered to vote. And we found quite a few folks that tell a judge, I'm not a citizen, but told the election board, I want to vote anyway. Well, that's not legal, but in Oklahoma, we purge the voter roll when that happens to be able to make sure those individuals that have already given sworn testimony they're not a citizen are not also registered to vote. That's not true everywhere across the country. Lots of folks just say, we just trust, but we never verify. We actually don't clean up the voter roll at all. There are some states that's really fascinating to me, like Arizona. Arizona has a state law in place right now that says every person that registers to vote must also prove their citizenship. This already exists right now. New Hampshire has a law that says every person that registers to vote has to show they're a citizen. This is not crazy policy. This is already happening in some of our states right now, that they have to be able to show they're a citizen. In Arizona, though, it's a very interesting thing. In Arizona, you can register to vote for a state election or a county election, and you've got to be a citizen. But if you want to vote for a federal election, you don't have to show that you're a citizen. You want to talk backwards. This was a case that broke out there in a court case for them where they established, oh no, you've got to show that you're an American citizen to vote for the governor of Arizona, but you don't have to show that you're an American citizen to vote for the President of the United States. If we can figure out how to be able to do registration, to be able to protect the rights of individuals in Arizona, to be able to vote for their governor if they're an American citizen, surely we can do this all over the country. The Save America Act is simple. It just says it's already the law that you have to be an American citizen to vote. Let's just verify it. The state of New Hampshire is not trying to limit the number of people voting. They're just following federal law. Then the second part of it, pretty simple. You have to show ID to vote. Now, 36 states already have this requirement. Let me just run through what this means. There are already 36 states that say you have to show an ID. Now, some of them are very narrow that they say you've got to have a specific type of photo ID on that. That's Arkansas. That's Georgia, Indiana, Kansas, Mississippi, Montana, Nebraska, Ohio, Tennessee, Wisconsin. They all have in their state law, you've got to have a certain type of photo ID to actually qualify you to be able to show up and to be able to vote. Multiple other states have some other limitation where it's a photo ID may be preferred, but they can also bring other IDs. That's Arizona, North Dakota, Utah, Wyoming, Alabama, Florida, Idaho, Iowa, Kentucky, Louisiana, Michigan, Missouri, New Hampshire, North Carolina, Rhode Island, South Carolina, South Dakota, Texas, Washington State, West Virginia, Alaska, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Hawaii, Oklahoma, Virginia, and Pennsylvania. This doesn't seem very controversial to me, If you're keeping count on fingers and toes, you ran out a while ago. It's 36 states. 36 states already have some kind of requirement for ID to be able to vote. This has got to be the most non-controversial proposal sitting out there to say, how can we disagree when 36 states already do this? But for some reason in this body, it's controversial for us as a nation to do what 36 states already do. So we bring this to the body yet again, as we have now for days and days and days. The American people are just not offended with pulling out an ID at an airport to be able to get on a plane. They're just not offended by showing ID when they walk into a federal building. They're just not offended by pulling out an ID in some places when they're going to write a check, for those that still know how to write a check in America. It's just not that offensive to be able to pull out some sort of identification. And state after state after state have shown this doesn't limit the number of people that can show up to vote. It just limits the amount of fraud that can happen in that state when people vote. You just can't walk up to a polling place and say, my name is, and pick a name. You've got to show something with your name on it to vote. It's pretty straightforward. 36 states already agree, and they've already put this in practice. So all we're trying to say is, can we continue this as federal law? I think we can. Not just saying it's federal law, but actually verifying that it's actually applied. I'm a big fan of the phrase trust and verify. That's all that this does. I would hope at some point we'd have a breakthrough here. But in the meantime, I'm going to continue to be able to come back and to say, why can't we all agree on what most Americans nod their head and say, that's a pretty good idea, and just get it done? Mr. President, I yield the floor. And I would note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Also Brooks.
Mr. President,
Chair Eknes, Senator from Georgia.
are we in a quorum call?
We are.
I ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I could not help but respond in real time to my very able colleague from the great state of Oklahoma. I really wish things were as simple as my Republican friends would have us to believe. They want us to believe that this is simply a basic voter ID bill. Let me say the same thing I said several days ago. I believe that you should have to prove that you are who you say you are before you vote. But this is not a voter ID bill. This is a voter suppression bill. They really ought to call it what it actually is. They ought to rename this bill, "Your driver's license is not enough to register bill." Not only is your driver's license not good enough in most states, except those states where your citizenship is a part of your driver identification. That's literally a handful of states. You will not be able to register to vote using your driver's license. You will not be able to register to vote using your student ID. You will not be able to register to vote using your military ID. Let's be very clear. The Republicans know that their policies are failing, that they have kicked 15 million Americans off of their health care, that they have doubled health care premiums for some 22 million Americans. They have dragged us, or they have enabled this president to drag us into a war, and he can't even explain why we're there. And they want to make it difficult for everyday Americans to hold them accountable. This will not stand. It will not succeed. This bill especially disenfranchises women. There are many people right now, listen to me at home, who are registered to vote right now, and you say, well, I've never had to prove my citizenship in order to vote. You will after this, if this bill is passed, you will. If you move, you'll have to re-register. If you change your name, if you get married, you'll have to register to vote as we do. And all of a sudden, your driver's license will not be good enough, even though you've been voting for years, decades. That will not be good enough. Imagine being a woman, your birth certificate does not match your current name. And so you got to go drag out documents that you haven't seen for years in order to certify that you are a citizen. And the question you ought to ask is why would they go through all of this? Why is this necessary when there is no evidence at all that we have some major problem of voter fraud through voter identification? It is already illegal to vote if you're not a citizen. It's illegal. They will deport you. You will be prosecuted under law if you register to vote and you are not a citizen. If you try to vote, you're not a citizen, it is a crime. You can be deported. And they're trying to convince us that there are droves of people in this country who are willing to risk deportation, risk being arrested, risk the abuse that we are seeing visited upon American citizens by ICE agents in real time, that they're willing to risk all of that in droves in order to change the outcome of an election. It defies credulity. And it's simply not true. Donald Trump wants to meddle with the outcome of the midterm elections because he knows that he is losing. And citizens who are watching this right now, not only ought you to reject this, as we're doing on your behalf, you ought to register in droves. and put this nonsense to an end. Democracy is the very house we live in. It is the place in which we get to fight for the things that we say matter. And little by little, they are chipping away at the democracy itself. Let the people speak. Let people cast their votes without having to jump over all kinds of unnecessary barriers. Why would you disenfranchise hundreds of thousands, millions of Americans while chasing a problem that does not exist? Why are you so afraid of the voices of the people? I ask my friends on the other side of the aisle. The most powerful words in a democracy are, "The people have spoken." We must ensure that no voter suppression bill prevents them from speaking. I yield the floor.
you.